live. All right, so we are back with some more Trudvang. So welcome to Upturned Table. And it's Christmas, so Merry Christmas. Christmas morning in most of North America. It's been Christmas for a while in other places, but hopefully you'll find this and it'll be a nice distraction or something to enjoy during this during this holiday season. Okay, so this is the second part of the Seed of Vanirs, the elfin background. So the elves. So previously, the first half were the different heritages, religion, the magic, both Vitner and the kind of the priests, the religious priests, which are more like astrologers for the star elves. And we're getting into festivals, ceremonies, and then it'll be, I think, the food and some different other details. It won't be as long. Maybe this will be a shorter session. I do have the Paul Bonner art book that we can take a flip through if this is very short. It has some nice background, also talking about the development of the setting and the look of things more because it's a visual guide, but some of the commentary was interesting, so we can take a flip through that as well if we if we have the energy. But yeah, so happy holidays, and on this Christmas morning, let's let's hear some pretty terrifying rituals of the elves. So this is Seeds of Vanir Part 2. Feasts, celebrations, and rituals. As with other races, there are a huge variety of ceremonies, feasts, and holy times that are celebrated by the elves, though these vary from tribe to tribe. Primarily, though, there are 4 feasts observed by each of the 3 main elven lineages, no matter how far they have wandered from the first home and the one tree that took root to give birth to the great forests. Huacha, Naraka, Falikala, Varipi, and Nauka. In addition to these 4 celebrations, elven tribes have developed. Each elven tribe has developed its own rituals and feasts. Huacha, the funerary practices. When one of the godless Corpicali leaves the mortal realm, they believe its essence returns to the Othawalio. It is not so very different from the beliefs that by the Elimeleni of Soj or the Talviaka of the frozen north. In each lineage, everything stops to honor the loss. The Othawalio is not a heaven, neither is it a resting place, but the source where all energies become one, and all existences are fused into a single harmony. Death is one of the few great tragedies for the elves, as for many thousands of years their kin were immortal. And even now, with the world turned so far from the betrayal of the Vanirs, a great many still cannot accept mortality. Some have never gotten over the shock, where others remain bitterly angry at the great betrayal. But there are a few who go further and curse the gods. When an elf dies, from the most natural of causes, age, it is a reminder of what was lost. Their kin return the body to nature, braiding the mortal remains into a hokaipana, a rare silver floral tree, during the ancient ritual known as the Huacha. Some silver floral trees have become the burial sites for entire generations of elves, whereas others carry only a single body close to their heart, These graveyards are known as Fjöld á Skolthisi among the elven kin and are hallowed places. According to the elven saga, in those days long gone, a single Hokkapani tree once grew so high it reached the stars. Now they hope by nourishing and nurturing this new generation of silver floral trees, one might do so again, allowing the body entombed within it to be carried to the stars, where it will be seen by the Vanirs, so that they might bring back the departed to life, and that they might show them the way back to Trudvang once more. Believing it might make a difference to the gods, the grieving Ilamaleni will often lay grave gifts with the dead, so that they may offer them to the Vanirs when they once again meet. Korpakali, of course, want nothing from these gods and their damned stars, so practice much more mundane burial rites, offering their corpses so that they might nourish and sustain the land. And the Talviaka face the difficulties of dwelling in barren lands, where little vegetation grows, either to be nourished with the rotting flesh, or to be raised up to the stars. So they have come to develop their own unique funerary rites. Elven funerals are a complicated and highly formalized affair, where the entire community meets to pay homage to the dead. While chosen relatives or friends braid the fallen, other tribe members sing the Nachka song in honor of the deceased. The ritual of the Vilpukaiku is performed a few days after the funeral. Visitors put their palms on nearby trees to feel the voice of the wildwood, while stories are told about the dead so the tree might remember them. It is a loving part of the ceremony, intended to preserve the essence of the departed, for as long as the trees grow, they will remember them. The stories of their lives, carried from root to branch throughout the length and breadth of the land. Later, during the following seasons, the nomadic tribes will often pass through the areas where the silver floral trees grow in order to pay homage to the fallen. Such trees can rise to towering heights, effectively becoming landmarks for the elven travelers. Elves have special cemeteries for the noblest of their number, the immortal and the long-lived. Like the Ikuinen and the Dalalakai. When they pass, they have the honor of being buried on a tree where the Yidras dwell, as it is done in Golianta in Samia. The Hokkapana grow only in Soj, which means these elves who dwell in the other regions of Trudvang took to using the same rituals, but utilizing other species and genus of trees, like the great old oaks and immense pines of the many tracts of the dark woods where the Korpakali live. For the Korpakali, the ritual itself has an entirely different meaning, with the dedication turned inward into the land and the heart of the ancient forests. In death, they seek to give back to nature all that they took during life, offering their mortal remains up, so that they might be in some small way returned to the land. Given the extremes of the landscape, the Huacha ritual is more complicated matters for the Talviaka. They have, therefore, developed other funerary rituals, including braiding the corpse into fissures of underground rock or sealing the deceased within the perennial ice flows, where they might be preserved for eternity. Another ritual involves cutting down through the ice to reach the hidden waters beneath, where the dead are wrapped in sealskins and submerged, where it is hoped that their body will become nourishment for the creatures of the frozen depths, and in each small piece of flesh consumed and bone stripped of meat, those memories of their lives, now ended, will be absorbed by the fish that feed upon them. It is worth remembering how, during their millennia-long history, given all the migration and warfare, the elves have been forced time and again to find other solutions for burial. For instance, it may be that a tribe is currently dwelling in a region of forest land where the trees are too small, or perhaps bush-like, and therefore not suitable for interring an elven corpse in their trunks. Alternatively, it can be that the local flora, even if large enough, is not remotely like the Hokapana trees of Soj, with no natural fissures that might be used to practice the huacha. In these places, the elven communities have begun burying their dead beneath mounds, akin to the manner the humans utilized for their heroes. These dead are never cremated, as elves abhor the destruction of fire and the ravages it inflicts upon nature, but also inhumed. These elven mounds are commonly marked by a young tree that is planted upon them, so that a lost life will feed the new one, and in that way, bringing the dead elves into the never-ending life cycle. Whenever possible, elves plant elf trees on these mounds, as they believe they're miraculous plants to protect the dead from the dark influences of Dimhall. Sometimes, though, death has been so great that such a ritual is impossible rather than impractical. For instance, in the wake of the Corpacoli slaughter during the Battle of the Five Spears. So many dead, it was simply not possible to return to the dark woods with their bodies. The fallen were instead interned in a huge burial mound that served as a mass grave. Much like the human and dwarven allies treated their dead, but even then, the surviving Corpacoli planted a golden willow to maintain the bond between dead and nature. Rarer still is the situation the elves who reside by the sea find themselves in. Torn between two elements of nature, the roiling sea and the indomitable earth, they follow a rite that straddles both, braiding their dead onto fallen tree trunks that are then pushed out by float into the ocean. Mourners of those elven communities will later visit the same shores for years to pay homage to the dead, though their mortal remains have long since been carried away. Nyaka Falekala. Nyaka Falekala is a solemn occasion. It is the most reverential and melancholy of all the great feasts, where the elves come together to weep for their dead who fell before the rushing of the long storm. The war with the dragons was bitter and brutal, beyond measure, the losses beyond number. The once great tribes were slaughtered, huge forests laid to waste, the scorched earth turned barren. In these years after the long storm, after it finally abated, survivors began to gather at a number of sacred sites to honor the fallen with death songs, known in the elven tongue as the Nyarkas. These melodies are both haunting and melancholic, and capable of evincing great sorrow from the listener, as the grief of the entire race is imbued within every long note. There is a level of enchantment to these songs which are capable of restoring the heart and resolve of those left behind, a final gift from the departed. The feast of the Naraka Falakala has no beginning and no end. It simply is, for as long as it needs to be, for the morning songs to be properly observed. Those who gather, first at the shrines and holy sites, lift up their voices and begin to sing. And others join in with the great song as they arrive, picking up the harrowing harmonies and weeping openly as they surrender to the great grief of their people. And just as the songs begin with a single voice, so too do they end with a single voice, as one by one the mourners leave the holy sites to return to their lives. Some of the Naraka Falakala mourning songs may be sung for weeks, and even in rare occasions, months. Such is the depth of the grief the elves harbor, even now. It is said that Atto Naraka Falakala, the long song, lasted almost a century, with the voices of the elves never faltering, some replacing fathers in the echoes of their great song, daughters replacing mothers as the mourning was observed. Those blessed in witness to the full heartbreaking glory of a Naraka Falakala tell of a tearful experience that forever changed them, for the song is both so beautiful and so desperately sad, they will carry sorrow in their hearts forever. Veripi. The elven brethren who chose to dedicate their lives to serving as guards of the Idras undergo a rite involving the entire tribal community. This rite doesn't happen on any given day of the year or with any understandable pattern of continuity. Any elf may, at any time, choose to undergo its Veripi, and after the completion of the ritual, thus be raised up as a guardian. A huge celebration is held in honor, with such singing and dancing as the chosen one is prepared for the final test, where they will be judged worthy or unworthy of the ancient and sacred duty. During this feast, at least 10 or more kin must pledge in oath, swearing that the elf is worthy, and they, in turn, assure the tribes that the chosen one will not fail and break their oath. Such an oath is never sworn lightly. Therefore, a number of trials are taken. These include, among other things, the killing of a giant spider single-handedly, swimming the rapids of an onrushing stream for several hours, as the great currents pull them down, and eventually kneel to sacrifice precious elf blood to the tribe by hanging upside down in leg hooks and being bled. The final trial takes the life of many of those who would serve as guardians. When all the Veripi trials have been overcome, the surviving elves are finally declared Puvaritya, or protectors. From that time onward, they will serve and spend their lives in the wilderness, far from their kin, always protecting the Idras. Even when their nomadic tribe travels away, they remain in the area, possibly meeting them again the next season, or equally possible, never seeing them again, if their sojourns take them far away from the Idras. Puvaritya work mostly in pairs, patrolling huge tracts of woodlands all around the area where the Idras grow. They are masters of stealth and survival, and very few creatures in Trudvang can hope to enter the sacred grove of the Idras unnoticed by their guards. Naoka. Elves carry within them a rare and precious gift, the ability to influence the natural world and nurture all living things. This blessing is the basis of a powerful fascination with all things that grow and germinate that some of the children of the stars develop. By no means all of them become obsessed with the natural world, but for those who do, much of their life is given over to a better understanding of how these life cycles prosper. with a fascination of how their lives might best be nourished and tended. There is an old truism: what an elf plants grows faster and survives longer than anything else. This is an element of truth behind the claim, as there are with most such old wives' tales. It is more doubtful when the superstitious folks making such claims stretch the truth to say what is planted by elfin hands becomes magical. But that is the nature of whispers. They take on a life of their own that takes them further and further from the truth. But perhaps there is an element of truth behind the fancy. In some glades of seedlings, they may in fact become nodes for Vintner, imbued with something more, as the superstitious believe, but some is far from many and nowhere near all. In the first blush of spring, the elves celebrate a glorious feast in their Demensne, known as Nauka. They dedicate themselves to one of the landscapes where they dwell, cultivating it to ensure the natural balance is favorable. This is the time when they plant their seeds, often gathered from the corners of the world, including places unknown on distant shores. The more adventurous of their kin return to the tribe with those exotic species and genus of flora and find them to blend them into the existing lands, contributing to the diversity of the flora and fauna. In rare cases, the tribal elders may yet possess seeds from the Age of Dreams. When these are finally sown into the rich soil of their homelands, the celebrations that ensue are filled with rapture and great joy, and are without doubt some of the most precious and beloved of all the rites the elves observe. Hilka Minen, Leaving Night, Ilmaleni and Talviaka. On Soj, during the night of Hilka Minen, the Leaving Night, ritual begins the period of great mourning. Beacon fires are lit within the huge head of the stone giant Jatlain Volvolja, who stands on the highest peak of the wild landscape. Ilmaleni gather to sing the Song of Leaving, one of the great laments to remember, reciting the names of 900 Vanir to keep their memories alive. The whispering of the names cements the bond between those left behind and the ones who left, with many of the Ilmaleni choosing to believe that the gods can somehow hear them, even if it is only the one word that carries through all the way through the heavens to wherever they are now. The purpose of the Leaving Night flames are to light a fire so bright it shines the way back to Trudvang, in the case the Vanirs have become lost and need a light to shine the way home. Even now, they cannot believe the gods will willingly abandon them, and there must be some other reason for their failure to return. The honor of putting the burning torch to the piles of kindling set within the crown atop the Yartilvolga the head of is one of the greatest that can be bestowed upon one of the tribe. Of course, as with any ritual, there is a fear that should the Helkamaninen beacon fires fail, the Vanir will never return, and the fault will fall upon the elves themselves. This ritual is also performed by the Talviaka in the north, usually around the burning spring of the Veskin Kapase. For the frost elves, this is also a coming of an age ritual, with the young initiates drinking the burning Vitner water from the sacred spring during the ceremony to awaken the life spark within them that they will carry into adulthood. Kamos and Kantohanki, Talviaka. Kamos, or the endless night, when the lands of the north of the great iron mountains fall beneath the yoke of the endless night. It is a strange one, for the sun never truly rises, but rather edges the horizon, transforming the land with an eerie blue light, meaning that it is never truly dark all day and all night, but rather that for hours in the mornings the land is lost beneath an eerie ghost light. In the last days of the sun, when the sun begins to fail, the Talviaka tribes undertake a rite meant to ensure that the sun does not leave this place forever. The ritual is rooted in the fear of abandonment that comes from the fact that the gods left this place and them, and involves ritual sacrifice drawn from amongst the youngest and most precious of the tribe, who were chosen by lottery and staked out on the ice and opened up as food for the animals that might otherwise starve through the long months of darkness. A similar offering, the Kanto Haki, is made as the ice begins to weaken and the darkness recedes, with the sacrifice being drawn amongst the oldest and most venerated of the tribe being offered in thanks to the gods for watching over them through the darkness. Again, they are chosen by lottery and staked out on the ice, though this time, with the thaw coming, the ice cannot hold and breaks beneath their weight, dragging them under the water, where they drown, if they have not died from exposure in the process. The sacrifice is already deceased before they go under the ice. That portents portents are believed to be good for the coming year, when the spirits rising up to the stars, whereas their last breath, if it comes after they sink beneath the surface, it is taken as a sign that their abandonment will go on. Whilst it is an honor to be chosen as one of the Kamos or the Kantohanki sacrifices. It is not an honor most elves would willingly volunteer for, though once chosen, none would refuse, even if it meant turning over a newborn. The selection of the sacrifices is one of the most holy rites of the Talviaka, which takes place over the course of 3 nights beneath the Revantulat, when the sky itself appears to burn, and involves the drawing of the Uharitios, a sacrifice bone, from a pit of ash after the burning of the Kotipu, a sapling planted during the previous year's ritual, by the sacrifice as their last mortal act. The Kotipu is nurtured from the seeds of the Talviaka that they brought with them from the Valtoris, and is one of the last links to their homeland. Kukinkta, Korpakoli. The coming of age for young dark elves is marked by a ritual that involves the whole community. The flowering, or Kukinta, is, as it is called, is held every summer solstice, lasting a whole day from one sunrise to the next, with the entire tribe remaining in vigil, waiting for all the candidates for adulthood to return with worthy prey. The Korpakoli consider themselves the apex predators of the forest and therefore judge the possible position of young adults within the tribe based upon the animal they bring back. Collaboration between multiple youths is allowed as it strengthens the social bonds within the tribe. Later in life, many adult dark elves will consider other Kukinen Tavaldlet or Kukinta brothers as closer than their bloodkin. On the other hand, bringing back an impressive prey, such as a warg beast or a frost boar, single-handedly defeated, will confer considerable prestige upon the young adult. Many young Korpakoli never survive the Kukinta, as they dare hunt lethal prey, while most common prey, like rabbits, small birds, or even fish, like trout or pike, are spurned. There is a shame in failing such a rite, as it can be repeated the following year, but failing twice will lead to mockery, and a third demands exile, as the young elf has shown themselves to be unworthy. This rite is toughest within the bounds of the Elika forest, as no youngster will be allowed to undertake the Kukinta if they are not able to demonstrate flawless knowledge of the whole of the Turvakolai, the epic song describing the history of the Korpakoli. Revontulet, Talviaka. Revontulet, or the fire in the sky, is amongst the strangest phenomena of Trudvang, and only occurs in the northern reaches in Nordland, and beyond, in Arkland and the Great Iron Mountains. Fire is a misnomer. It is more like the night itself is torn asunder, and the soul of the universe spills in through the rent. The firmament takes hold of hundreds, if not thousands, of subtle shades of green and blue, then fold in on themselves and ripple out in eddies and coils, like blood spilling into a bubbling brook, only to swirl away with the river flow, the blood becoming spirals that then form endless new shapes on the surface before they are finally swept away. Revontulet is a time of great reflection for the Talviaka, who believe they are witnessing the death of the gods, the blood of the Vanirs filling the heavens before their lives are finally extinguished. There are those amongst the tribes who seek to divine some sort of wisdom and comfort from the patterns with the fire in the sky, seeking out one final message from their gods that may or may not be there. Ruska, the reddening, Ilmaleni, and Korpakoli. Ruska, where the leaves turn gold before the fall, is a breathtaking season, ushered in with a mournful ritual where the elves gather around the oldest tree in their forest and score deep clefts in the land for the dead leaves to fall and be absorbed back into the earth, nourishing it in their death. It is part of the cycle of life. In death, the trees nurture the soil that, in turn, helps them live through the bleakest of winters. The reddening is a soulful time, tinged with sadness, as it is a memory of the great enemy, time. There are those amongst the tribes who believe that this season echoes their own life cycle, and that, as with the fallen leaves, when they die, they too nourish the land that in turn allows those left behind to survive the coming years without them. There is something beautiful that accompanies it, in both mournful and yet infused with hope that what might yet grow out of death. Kings, chieftains, and leadership. The High King of Valkalainen, the Sojlakota, is the nominal ruler of the fabled Valtoris, and, along with it, the entire island of Samia. And, at least in theory, he is the rightful heir of the Walatheli, the Valki, and Valanjna. From the age of dreams, every Sojlakota has belonged to the Ulumaleni lineage. The current ruler is Kalika, who wears kivirengas, the same wooden rings that have been worn by the Valkainen king and queens since the coming of the Vanirs. Sadly, despite the links of kinship, these high kings and queens have lost any real power over the elves of Trudvang, and are reduced now to being little more than moral authorities and keeper of the ancient wisdom and traditions. Neither Talviaka or Korpakoli have obeyed any high king or queen in the Valkanen since the Age of Dreams, and even the Illumaleni themselves turned their backs to them since the closing of the Age of the Queen. There is perhaps unsurprisingly a curious parallel between the history of the elves and dwarves. Both of these peoples at the beginning obeyed one single ruler during the Age of Dreams, the elven Sojkolota of Valtoris and the dwarven Stormthun of Tovolgoya. But the command of both declined during time. However, there is one important difference. Dwarves retained some level of complexity in their social structure and civilization, reorganizing themselves into separate kingdoms and realms, each one ruled by its own thun. While the elves preferred to return to a simpler social system that was more natural for them, small, isolated groups, mostly unified by bloodline, akin to clans and tribes. There was no space for kings or queens in their new savage world. The Talviaka and the Korpakoli were the first to experience this transition from a more stately divine entity dividing into smaller tribes, and sometimes splintering further still into even smaller clans within the tribes, like families. This diaspora has already begun by the end of the Age of Dreams, as they migrated northward. Even so, the old elven monarchy and its stately structure somehow survived through the Age of the Iron Worm and the Age of the Queen for about 11 millennia, until the death of the immortal queen, Phalagina. It was during those painful days of mourning that the role of the Sadvakoita of Valtoris lost meaning, even for the Star Elves. Only occasionally, during the long millennia after the Age of Dreams, some elven tribes and clans have been united under a banner of a charismatic or powerful leader who self-proclaim themselves king or queen. In both current Eka and the old Fornica languages, the word for their leaders has always been Lokoiti, which is a neutral word used for both a king or queen, without delineation of sex or gender. During the Age of Dreams, these Lokoiti were nominal vessels of the first Sojlakoita, the High King Welitheli, ruling lands far from the Soj archipelago, like the legendary Volkohana, queen of the lost Utakamaijalo, in what is today's Dragon Forest. Sometimes Welitheli allowed powerful subjects even in Soj to bear this title, like the wise king Salavihan and the ruler of Turvaika, where later the Korpakoli cursed their gods and the first to tame the wild Skulds. Very few elven leaders succeeded in becoming recognized as kings or Lokoiti during the later ages, and those that have done so by uniting all of the many tribes and clans of a specific reason. In truth, this happens for more often among the warlike Korpakoli of the Dark Woods than it does in either of the other lineages. These petty kings of the Dark Elves never swear allegiance to the Illumaleni High King Volakanen. They remain fiercely independent, local rulers, and sometimes happen not just among the Talviaka, but even among few of the Illumaleni's largest communities. These local royal dynasties never endure among the elves, and their bloodlines rarely manage to maintain their hold on power for more than a few generations, if that. Elves are quite different from humans in that regard. They are attuned to nature, the nature of balance. When they feel weakness or fissures opening up within the tribe, they are quick to revert to their small, independent tribes and clans rather than follow one they know to be weak or wrong. Perhaps unsurprisingly, today elven culture seems to shy away from the formation of large, complex societies. Most elves abide in small, wandering clans of between 20 to 50 individuals, united by blood ties, though sometimes they will congregate in larger tribes, which rarely consist of more than 50 to 100 individuals. Oddly enough, the word clan can even be used within elven society to not only describe small tribes or families within the same tribe, but also to mean a means to identify groups that are larger than a single tribe. In fact, some tribes, especially among the Illumaleni of Samia and Edras, feel bonded by common ancestors and are bound by similar ideologies. These great multi-tribal clans are rarely real confederations, as elves avoid forming large political alliances and entities, but are more akin to unions linked by religion, customs, and tradition. The tribes are often led by chieftains, or in larger tribes, by councils of elders. The elven word for these chieftains is oikolote, although it is not uncommon for it to be used for the eldest member of the clan or of all the elders as a term of respect. Given the incredibly long history of the elves and how diverse and stretched their three main elven lineages are, all manner of governance systems have been tried, used, and rejected over the centuries, with marked differences between even the same bloodlines in the same regions, as they seek the fairest form of leadership. Sometimes, among the larger tribes, where inner conflicts are more common, the leadership is passed among different families, with the passing of the current leader, while at other times a single tribe can be ruled by a diarchy of leaders, sometimes composed of brothers, rivals, or even, on occasion, a husband and wife. In some tribes, a council of elders, led by the eldest, govern over everyday life, while they give all the power to a chosen one during specific times of crisis, such as a war chief, who may be elected during times of war, or an exceptional hunter during times of famine. An expert Ihana can rule a tribe during certain sacred times, following the Toikoloke tradition, and a famous vintner weaver can be elected if the elves are facing a supernatural threat. Not all of the elven tribes are so democratic, and a dictatorship of one elf rule may exist, verging on authoritarianism. The tribes and rituals concerning the transfer of power can also be quite elaborate, and often confusing to those not well versed in the peculiarities of the tribes, for many Korpakoli tribes may choose their leader only after ritual hunts in the deep forest, for instance, after a successful raid against their enemies, more frequently trolls, while at times of peace, violent duels may be used to decide who is to be destined to lead the tribe. This kind of challenge is more common amongst the Korpakoli, with the powerful young warriors often seeing and loathing the weakness in the older ruler. Age is weakness. Weakness is death. In many of the Talviaka and Illumaleni clans, the leader is chosen only if several Ihana agree that the signs from the stars point towards the same individual. Leadership is occasionally inherited from father or son, but since survival is more important to the nomadic elves than empty traditions, strength and skill are seriously considered, when selecting a leader. A chieftain's daughter or son will more often than not be largely ignored if a better candidate is to be found within the tribe. Wisdom, charisma, and knowledge are key factors when it comes to choosing leaders amongst the Alamaleni and Talviaka, while the Korpakali are more concerned with physical attributes over mental ones. They look for hunting skills, leadership traits, and prowess in battle. In theory, any elf which is still blessed by the gifts of immortality, like the Ikunin, or even just long life, like the Dalakai, would be naturally seen as a leader by others. These individuals are so scarce nowadays, there are elves who do not believe they exist anymore. Social structure. Social structure within the typical nomadic tribes and clans is usually simple. Elder Ihana, or more valorous leaders of war, have a role when needed within the communities. Equally, it is not unknown for ruling bloodlines and elite families to be found within their number. However, the reality is that there tends to be more similarity than difference between the disparate elven societies, and it is seldom a simple matter of seeing clear-cut social class within them. In all of the small nomadic tribes, every elf has their chore or duty they are expected to perform. Most often, they are not an everyday occurrence. These chores are fundamental to the day-to-day life of the tribe. Of course, there are those who have more specialized duties and talents, including the likes of healers, bards, and Ilhana. But every elf is expected to gather food, hunt, and fight when needed. There is no room for idle nobles amongst the elves. Social structures are slightly more defined within the few still surviving elven permanent villages, which are mostly to be found on Soj. But this is unsurprising given how the needs of the large settlements are magnified and more demanding than the needs of a nomadic tribe. These places need yet more specialized skills and often see the formation of ruling elites without whom these settlements might not survive. Even so, the given nature of elven villages and the inescapable fact that each and every one of them develops within the bounds of Trudvang's forests most usually within the canopies of the treetops, where they are in close contact with natural life. Their societies are still relatively simple in terms of stratification. Slavery is unheard of amongst the elves, unlike the human cities and dwarven realms, where the exploitation of others is rife. Elven societies tend to be more equalitarian, also in terms of gender. Of course, there are sometimes occurs with the smaller nomadic tribes that a specific gender role is adopted for surviving the wilderness. This is most often down to the need of a system to work as a single whole organic whole, rather than a case of sexism. For example, if mothers carrying small children who need to be breastfed, others within the tribes will protect and feed them. It is fair to say that in general terms, everyone within the tribe is treated the same in terms of the hierarchy and the ability to advance in it. This is true of both many small clans and the few surviving elven permanent settlements. But it is worth remembering that if the three most renowned immortal monarchs of the Valakanen, Welitheli, Aino, Valki, and Valagina, the last two were queens, not kings. Furthermore, even amongst their successors of later centuries, the number of queens was almost equal with the number of kings. That is not to say elven societies are perfect, even if many scholars would have you believe so. Evil and low passions, including envy and hatred, are present in the elven heart, just as they are in the dwarf and human heart, and those base emotions can cause tragedy and suffering. Elven justice. Those caught damaging the tribe for their own personal gain are punished. Telviaka, and especially the Corpacoli, are known for the gruesome punishments, which go so far as to include wounding, maiming, and scarring. The Telviaka must exert such punishment given that they live in a harsh, frozen environment of the north, which is more merely unforgiving. It is lethal. It is different for the Corpacoli. They appear to revel in their role as apex predators in the forests and make those who betray them suffer purely for the suffering itself. Unwitting mistakes and errors of judgment are punished, not just crimes, especially if they lead to forest fires or draw enemies like trolls or wildfolk to the elves. The most common punishment, in this case among all of the lineages of elven kin, is exile. The rogue elves are called Kolivodka, or tribeless, or Mostavares, the lost, as they are stripped of any social or familial connection with their kin and cast out, ending up isolated in harsh environments. Many of these rogues are forced to steal food from their own relatives until they are caught and punished again, in a vicious cycle of pain and suffering. There are tales where whole groups of the tribeless individuals act as bandits or raiders. They are not happy stories, and usually end with the tribeless ones killed by their kinfolk. Many Kolovoika end up seeking out human settlements, becoming adventurers, or selling their skills as scouts and hunters as a way to survive. Secret societies and lodges. An oft-forgotten topic when it comes to the conversations about the elven tribes is how, despite their social structures, they can hide deep complexities, invisible to others. For example, among the larger tribes, there may well exist hidden and prestigious societies, lodges, or brotherhoods, where individuals are accepted into their number by invitation only, and even those invited must survive the initiations. These groups exist to preserve the ancient and venerable traditions as a means of handing down the oral heritage to the new generation of elves. Each society has its own specific rituals and beliefs, and each lodge may be dedicated to a specific facet of elven culture. There are as many warrior societies as there are lodges for healers, reindeer herders, hunters, vintner weavers, and ihana. There are also societies dedicated not to specific professions, but rather to social roles like fathers and mothers, or to the honor of protecting specific natural sites, perhaps a waterfall where the Vanirs once bathed, or a battlefield where the elven hero slew a loja worm during the Falakala. On occasion, the hierarchy within the secret lodges may work quite differently from the everyday hierarchy of the tribes. A clan chieftain may hold a lower status within the ranks of the secret society, obliged to bow his head in front of the others who would normally be beneath him. Among the smaller clans, it isn't uncommon for them being too small to host a society, but rather those clanfolk join with others from some small clans within the territory, with secret societies acting as multi-tribal groups. It isn't uncommon for the bonds formed here to be pivotal in diplomacy between the different tribes and clans of the region. with secret societies in effect acting as a council to tackle common problems and solve disputes. Equally, competition among societies is not unheard of, and different lodges may fight against each other to gain prominence within a single forest. During the past 16 millennia, the Dark Woods have seen many such lodge wars, which humans remain ignorant to. Elves have spilled elven blood for the sole purpose of dominance within a forest. Relationships with creatures of Trudvang. There are a number of creatures in Trudvang that bear special mention for their importance to the elves. These include, but are not limited to, Hjolds, Yggdras, and giant spiders. Hjolds. Clad in wings, with the legs of a cat and the body of a troll, Hjolds have long, sharp ears and tusks like a warthog. Their thick hair is raven black and grows like a mane down their back. They are exceptionally rare creatures, loyal to the elves and their traditions, since their taming by the Selvehen in Turvanaika, the city where the gods were cursed by the Corpacoli. The king bound them to the place, knowing their gift for riddles, bade them watch over the repositories of knowledge given to the elves by the Vanirs. They live in the shadows and use camouflage skills to remain hidden. They are dangerous creatures who take their pledge to the Selvehen seriously, even now. It is a sacred duty. They will not fail him. They will guard the repositories with their lives, fighting any who come to steal the knowledge to the death. Their riddles are passed from mother to daughter, secrets carried down through the centuries. To the elves, they are a friend. More than that, they are bonded and share immense respect for one another. An elf would never harm a Hjold. Yggdras. The forests of Trudvang are home to many miraculous creatures, but none more so than the mighty Yggdras. These strange creatures are perhaps the oldest of all on Trudvang, though the Corpacoli would save that honor for the forest spirit Samalika. The first memories the elves have of the Yggdras have their roots in the days they walked the world with their gods, before the long storm, and the black fire that purged the landscape. It is said they were joined, one creature root to root, all aspects of the Yggdras connected to the soul of nature itself. What is perhaps not understood is the nature of the Yggdras, or what makes an Yggdras. The misconception is that it is some venerable kind of tree, but it is not. Or at least, it is not only that. The elves contend that it is not the wood of the creature that makes it Yggdras, but rather an essence of the creature that hid within the trees that is the Yggdras, and that it could very easily take refuge in an animal of the forest, in any shrub or flower. They call the soul creature a Drajol. The Drajols live in perfect harmony with the nature of the world, and in that way are its protectors. The Yggdras is not like Samalika, who is a creature of the Othawalio, the very stuff that is the essence of Trudvang that was shaped into the world, in much the way that the Drajole soul is of the Othawalio. It is true that the elves believe it was the Yggdras that first mastered the hidden magic and crafted the gifts that is Vintner, and the Vanirs had a role in the process of teaching it to the elves, together with the divine-infused arts. Indeed, the similarity would make sense of the Corpacoli's ability to work with the Alahuth to work the Tuikoloke, much as the Ohana would. Because they draw their link to the Othawalio through the primordial creatures that are Samalika and his kin. There is a curiosity here in this similarity, as the Idras are mentally connected, living in symbiosis with their trees, a single being shared out across several bodies, as though it is the stuff of creation that gives them life. Now compare that to Samalika and his kin. Can the same be said for these forest spirits? Are they part of a great collective knowledge as old as time itself, in touch with everything that is in the world and bound to its root and branch in the same way as the Yidras? Then what of the Tavalika on ice? On the ice, where no trees grow. If both of their kin draw their magics from the spirit of the forest and their shared links to the Othawalio, what then of the frost elves? Are there no Ihana or Alpha Youth amongst them? Have the Drajol souls not made it across the yarn gods, and no Idras have found their home there? There is still much we don't know about the frost elves, but there is an ancient song that perhaps offers a clue to the nature of the Idras in the north, which talks of faces in the bark, of strange formations of frozen trees formed during the volcanic outbreaks that so destabilized the land. These trees of ice tower above the landscape, formed by huge geysers that erupted only to freeze and remain forever caught between the heartbeat of creation and the collapse before the water could come splashing back down. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps there are faces in those ice trees. The presence of the Idras within Trudvang's forests serves as a secondary purpose, as those ancient guardians have taken a position near weaknesses in the world, where threats from the Othawalio may steal through and stand as a barrier against their incursion, not unlike the way the dwarves carved out Stonefiges and the Stonehinges to help push back the chaos of emptiness from the tunnels of their mountain home. When the last Idras withers and finally dies, there will be nothing to hold the chaos of the Othawalio back, and the harmony that the Vanirs instilled upon the world will be lost forever. With Trudvang returned to the wild time before the great song. The Idras possess unfathomable knowledge, such as their wisdom that the elves believe that anything they do not know is lost to time itself. The truth may well be that they remember everything, but consider some truths too much for the elves to handle. Giant spiders. Intelligent and highly dangerous, these arachnids are amongst the deadliest of foes. Their enmity with the elves predates their loathing for the worms, and indeed predates the coming of the Vanirs, the spiders being the oldest predators in Trudvang. These are not common spiders of today, but huge creatures that weave unbreakable webs to snare their food and feasted upon the first children. They are relics of a time when Trudvang was nothing but a chaos-ridden world before harmony was instilled by the songs of the elven gods. These spiders wove vintner as well as spun webs, and were the natural enemies of the first elves. Having been on the land from long before the descent of the Vanirs, these arachnids made their homes within the dark places of the forests, turning huge tracts of land into web-clotted mazes with the sole purpose of catching unsuspecting elves as they sought to sow fresh seeds and help the forest grow. But their fierce intelligence may owe more to the demon spirits the elves believe infused within them. Using the giant spiders as a host, The elves believe it is the multifaceted eyes that allow the spiders to be entered so easily by these demon souls. But what of the demonic entities themselves? Akin to Samalika and the Idras, the elves have come to believe that there are somehow elements of chaos that have escaped the Othawalio, part of the untamed world that existed before the Vanirs brought harmony to the world. One of the most dreaded animals in the Soj, these giant spiders, still dwell in the deepest woods of the Soj archipelago, though, thankfully, only in the smallest numbers. Though to happen upon a spider with the gift of vintner weaving today is extremely rare and most unfortunate, to say the very least. In those ancient days, elven hunters tracked and slew spiders to avoid becoming their prey, knowing that several of the tribes depended upon eradicating the threat. Nowadays, the spiders are hunted for their cobwebs, which are used to fashion beautiful fabrics, crossbow bolts, arrows, and incredibly strong rope. Midlander traders and sailors tell stories about how elves craft this unnatural shimmerweave fabric from the web of the largest spiders. This is a simplification, as shimmerweave is made by combining different silks and webs, but it clearly suggests the role of the dreaded spiders for the elven culture. Warfare practices. During the first 2 ages of Trudvang, it was possible to witness immense elven armies facing off against the threat of worms and the never-ending hordes of Basturs. At the time of the Old Alliance, Queen Valky was not against dispatching whole armored infantry units northwards to fight side by side with her dwarven friends against the Yarnworms. Sagas about the Long Storm speak about cavalry units of elves riding the great horses of the plains and what was to become Meatland barebacks, charging the Basturs vassals of the Loja worms. There are even some songs about great vintner weavers of the past, masters of the now long-lost secrets, changing the faces of the battlefield with their world-shaking arts, coordinating the mayhem they caused with the refined strategies of the best generals of antiquity. But the world turns. Those great elf armies are no more. After the long storm and the suffering of the War of Tears, elven society fragmented into a web of isolated, increasingly smaller clans, often distrusting of their own kin. Now they found themselves living in a world where the elven realms of old were wiped out by the wormfire, and the power of the high kings and queens of Eltoris has dwindled through the millennia. Elven warfare has evolved into an art seemingly best suited for small warbands, whose tactics are almost identical to the hunting practices of the Seeds of the Vanirs they have known since the world was young. Elves of all kinds, whether they are Corpacoli, Ilomilani, or Talviaka, consider war not as some huge destructive conflict, but rather a series of skirmishes and smaller battles. If dwarves at war focus on stalwart defenses of key strategic points, and bone-deep, stubborn resistance in the face of overwhelming forces, elves adopt a mentality of mobility and stealth. They know the value of ambushes as well as how and when to retreat, and to use that retreat as a cover, only to later hit the enemy from the flanks, before they withdraw again, like an angry wasp, harrying at their foe in an endless series of hit-and-run tactics. An elven warband can hit a larger force without being noticed. Quickness is their strength, and the desire to avoid any sort of encumbrance is why they seldom wear armor, and when they do, it is never more than light leather or fur rather than metal armors. An elven attack will rarely last more than a few minutes. Volleys of arrows come from nowhere, and rapid attacks with mieka spears might make light work of their enemies before the elves disappear once more. Whether they live on the shores of Samia, in the depths of the dark woods, or on the great ice plains, elves are masters of exploiting the natural landscape. They know where to hide, as well as they know how to turn nature into an ally against the armies who often lack the necessary survival skills demanded by the terrain. Vintner weavers and ihana are integral parts of the strategy, using their subtle powers to enhance their companions' skirmish tactics. If they have luxury of time, elves will often hinder invading armies with the same manner of traps that they would use for hunting large animals, hidden pits, and falling trunks. Today's elves are at a loss in open warfare and avoid it as much as possible, as the large expanses favored by human armies. Only the Talviaka know how to properly fight on flat landscapes without trees and bushes to aid them. Instead, they tend to exploit the glacial and storm-ravaged nature of the lands, and would find themselves at a loss, forced to fight on most of the prairies of the Meatland. The same can be said of both the Dark Elves and the Star Elves, who are used to fighting and hunting within the dense forests. In effect, the participation of the Corpacoli in the Battle of the Five Spears in the year 1146 of the Age of Stars was nothing short of exceptional. They went to war, knowing their weaknesses on the plains of Bohain, but somehow found a way to be effective, acting as archers, scouts, and skirmishers in support of their human and dwarven allies. Elves are not well versed in the art of siege warfare. This is perhaps understandable, not only because they lack the resources and organization to lay a siege, but fundamentally because they have no interest in conquering cities and fortresses. The idea of having to be bound to a place is like the anathemic to them. Unlike their ancestors, elves of today do not utilize cavalry tactics. They treat horses as friends and, at least in theory, could still use them as bareback mounts, but today horses have no role in elven warfare. Their mounts are ineffectual in the depths of the forest, and for the Talviaka, weak and vulnerable on the great ice plains. Elven diet. Elves are by nature a nomadic people, even if few deep-rooted or semi-permanent settlements exist among the Ilamaleni in Soj. As with their other brethren, the elves of Soj live off the stuff of the land, nuts, roots, various edible flowers, and fungi. On occasion, they will hunt for meat, but this is far from a regular thing, and for the Ilamaleni, incredibly rare. While by nature, elven kind are omnivorous by choice, they are more often than not herbivores, especially among the star elves, preferring to draw sustenance from the land rather than its creatures. There is a lesson in this, that it is better to live beside another species in harmony than it is to look upon them as a source of nourishment. Or at least that it is what many Ilamaleni believe. Again, it is about the balance of nature. Elves call their hunters Tomi, which translates roughly to keepers of balance. But the exact nature of this balance changes according to each elven culture. While many elves believe that the ecosystem of Trudvang is dependent upon all living things finding a way to coexist, there are those among the Corpacoli who view things more in terms of the hierarchy of life. arguing that there is a number of species which are natural predators and others that are natural prey. And their role in the cycle of life is to provide nourishment for the apex predators that roam the lands. Harvested wild crops make up a large part of the diets of the elven lineages. Hunting and fishing are fundamental to the existence of the Talviaka and Korpakoli. For the Frost Elves, hunting is paramount. They live in this hostile glacial environment where any sort of nourishment vegetation is beyond rare, whereas the Dark Elves' notion of hunting with Korpakoli, the apex predator within the Demnes, has been shaped by their nomadic life and demands the ecosystem of the wild darkwood places upon them and their chances of survival. Many elven clans tend herds. These are more commonly composed of reindeer. The herds move with animals, always looking for pastures new and never-ending in the cycle of find, settle, move, which repeats throughout the seasons. Elves take meat, skin, and milk from their animals, but treat them with respect, never impoverishing the herd or causing unnecessary pain or fear. These herding elves are frequently found among the southern Talviaka and the Korpakoli, while the Ilamaleni of Soj prefer to keep reindeers wild and savage in their Hauma hunting grounds. Nomadism, housing, and settlements. It is vital to underscore one thing. Their nomadic existence doesn't in any way imply a lack of connection with the land or specific lands. Elven tribes, like the animals they tend, are content to wander and migrate in cycles, traveling through roughly the same region they have always traveled through, dating back to the time of the ancestors. And this is true everywhere nomadic elves can be found, be it on Soj, in the dark woods, or on the great ice plains. There are patterns to the migration, too. The nomadic elves have landmarks they return to as the seasons change. These sites are more often than not marked by a totem tree, though they also include sacred sites, holy trees, and even cemeteries. There are centuries-old oaks, which are as well known by the generations of migrating elves that each has its own name, and is also the subject of a song or a saga. These lands are not exclusive to one clan, or indeed, sometimes different clans may share the same territories and resources during the different seasons. When this happens, their accords are generally marked into the bark of the totem trees, so that none may mistake their right to be here. At other times, nomadic elf clans may even clash against each other, fighting for the scant resources to be had. These kinds of clashes happen within the confines of the forest, and whispers of which never leak out, hence the misapprehension that elven society is perfect. Not all elves are nomads, though, and perhaps surprisingly, those more sedentary souls do not all reside in the same few permanent villages in Soj. The truth is that some elves, called Koivhas, amongst their people, fall in love with a specific area and spend all their existence there, dedicating themselves to the land and tending it. They are not farmers, though. The notion of farming is anathema to anathema. Sorry. The notion of farming is anathema to the elven kin. Rather, these koivas serve as guardians, tending to a specific tract of woodland. This dedication is more common among the Ilamaleni than it is among the other elven lineages. No matter the lineage, elves tend to live in small tribes and clans, rarely gathering in numbers greater than 20 to 50 individuals. Whilst they live isolated lives, different tribes belonging to the same lineage, Ilamaleni, Corpicoli, or Talviaca may gather to exchange news, share experiences, and observe the feast days together. It is different, of course, in the few permanent settlements that elves hold. The population of these villages is considerably more. These ancient elven homes are often constructed high within the treetops, and with walkways spanning branches over dizzying heights and homesteads fashioned out of the stuff of the forest itself. Intricately woven branches form the foundations of the village that the villages are built upon, with plants and other living materials acting in many cases as the ties that bind them together. Not all of these settlements float within the treetops, though. Some have been built on the forest floor, though even in these instances the buildings are not rooted straight into the earth, but stand on platforms constructed from branches and reeds and other plant life. These few remaining elven permanent villages are found in Soj and belong to the Ilamaleni elves. Larger Corpicoli and Talviaca settlements in the north have been known, though they reside in Trudvang's past and rarely lasted more than 1 or 2 generations before they crumble and were abandoned. For an intruder in the forest, it is almost impossible to find an elven town, even if they are to stumble into the very heart of it. Such is the artfulness of its construction, with live plants and trees interweaving and entwining within the buildings. It is difficult to tell one from the other, meaning vast settlements can be shaped out of the forest and remain virtually invisible to those who don't know where they are. Being nomadic by nature, the elves have become adept at building temporary shelters within the trees. The simple method of construction involves braiding supple branches together to form walls. It takes them, relatively speaking, no time to fashion a village in this manner, and once they move on, leaving the settlements for the forest to reclaim, nature very quickly ensures that only the echoes of these abandoned places linger, and those eventually fade to nothing. There is not a single established manner for constructing elvish dwellings. Their buildings may take multiple shapes. Elves, in fact, tend to adapt their architecture to the forms of the trees and other natural structures of the land, including rock formations and waterfalls. Elven houses in the few remaining elven settlements are mostly fashioned out of wood, though other materials, including rarer spider silks, bones, and horns are used of large animals can be utilized. These materials are, in theory, perishable. This is the primary reason why they are the precious few lingering marks of the ancient cities of the Age of Dreams on the world. Elven cities return to nature as wood rots and the new vegetation covers everything. The ancient cities provide one of the few anchors we have in terms of the elven civilization. Most of these have long since returned to the land that they were raised from. Few of the most revered holy sites remain. These that do not include places like the ancient battlefields of the Falakala and the sacred groves where the Idras grow. Again, it is incredibly important to stress how the elves of the Age of Dreams were masters of the Solviaka arts, achieving a level of mastery unmatched by their descendants of today. With that in mind, it is surprising how little remains of the wooden structures from the Age of Dreams. Even if they would be more than 16 millennia old, there are those few that do survive, and they can be found preserved in the hearts of many of the ancient forests. They are beyond any mere ruin and hold a sacred place in the heart of the elven kin, for they are where the ancients walked. Those same ancient elves didn't limit their arts to woodcraft. They even raised huge stone megaliths, especially within the boundaries of their sacred sites, and even dug elaborate tunnel systems and networks underground. None of these seem to have survived though they could well be a few honeycomb tunnels beneath Soj. That cannot be denied. What cannot be denied is that the ancient elf ruins are incredibly alien to our eyes today. All right, and this is the timeline. So it's a historical timeline, which may not be very conducive to reading. So I think we'll stop there. That's all the elven background, and then I think it gets more into creating elven characters. Here's all the ages that we talked about. Perhaps there'd be a little bit of enlightenment. They mention these ages in the text, but we don't know so much the events. But I think there's going to be so many place names and proper names that it would just be more confusing than anything else. All right. Let's see here. So after that we have, okay, so after this whole timeline, then it gets us to present day. We have stories and myths. Is there more? Let's see. How are we doing on time? I think after that timeline, it might be more useful. Oh, we're already 90 minutes. The schism, the separation of the heart, division of lineages, war. Wow, we might even be able to do a part 3. Yes, because it goes on. It goes on to show. Yeah, so it goes from the earliest times to then the division of the lineages. Yeah, and then it talks about all of the famous weapons. Wow. Yeah, and weapons and legendary artifacts. Interesting. Oh, here's the map. So this is the poster map of Soj, the archipelago that is included. So there's Idras, Samia that they're talking about. And all of this is Soj, basically. Oskla. Yes. Nice. Let's see. Yeah, so here's the whole Soj archipelago. So yeah, then it'll go into each of the areas, each of the islands, and what happens on there. So if anyone is interested in running through any of this, either the Dwarven strongholds or the Elven islands, there is a whole section like that. Yeah, let's do a little bit, because I think they mentioned the Falakala a lot in the text that we already read. So some of this might be useful. Let's go a little bit into that, and maybe through the schism. I think this is an interesting. We don't have to go through all of the war, but through the schism, that might be useful. Yeah, because then we start into all the famous weapons. All right, so we'll continue a little bit after that timeline section with the elven stories and myths. Elven stories and myths. The previous pages have shown something of a schematic chronology that has to be considered the main events of Elven history. The truth of the matter, though, is that over the millennia, the seeds of the Vanirs have experienced tragedy, hope, horror, and triumph beyond counting, too many by far to ever be contained within the covers of a single book. Even more that have slipped into the haze of saga and the song and lost the shape of truth they once had. The oral traditions of Trudvang are strong, there is no denying that, but likewise, sing a song often enough and the mistakes filter in and are handed down from singer to singer until eventually they bear little resemblance to the truth. What follows is a selection of some, but by no means not all, of the main sagas Elven bards love to sing, many of which date to the Age of Dreams, which remains the single most defining period of Elven culture. There are, of course, many other new sagas being composed even now, as history finds itself being written by a new generation of myth spinners and Hjalds. Falakala, the Long Storm. There was a time before war, when there was a time after war, but in the middle there was the long storm, and it was brutal. Such violence raged that it threatened to tear the world apart, leaving nothing but scorched earth and twisted trees and ash in its wake. The memory of that conflict is burned so deep into the psyche of the Alamaleni tribes that they vowed a sacred oath, the Rahan Sana, binding them to peace evermore, rather than face the prospect of life being wiped from the face of the world, which is the only alternative should there ever be another conflict like the Long Storm. The Korpakali swore no such vow, but rather amidst themselves pledged to fight to their dying breath for the land, that they should this ever arise. Reduced to the most simplistic terms, the Long Storm was a war that raged between the dragons and the elven tribes. Though, at the onset of the storm, the elves did not stand alone, but rather fought side by side with their creators, the Vanirs. Much of this history is anything but that, existing rather in the form of sagas and tales passed down through the ages by word of mouth, and no matter how close the myth spinner has tried to hold true to the stories as they learned them, there will always be deviations, embellishments, and outright falsehoods for the sake of a better tale. Still, with that caveat in mind, some truths are evident. For one, there have always been worms on Trudvang, existing here since before the gods fell. How many worms were present in Trudvang in those times is difficult to say, but it is known, for instance, that dragons do not occur within the chronicles of the Timal, the blessed seasons where the Vanirs shaped Trudvang together with the elves. Some scholars say that dragons were precious few in number amongst the rarest of creatures of the young world, and reticent in nature, keeping to themselves on the fringes of the world, avoiding contact with other species who had begun to breed, finding hidden places within the ecologies of the world. But it is an unreasonable superstition. Otherwise, lore masters claim the countless worms that have been hibernating in the deepest depths of the underground world of Muspelheim since the creation of the world. One might reasonably assume that there is more than a grain of truth to both versions, given what the sagas remember. Perhaps then, the reason it felt as though there were both precious few and yet all there, eternal, is the waves of worms belonging to the differing breeds woke on different cycles and rose from Muspelheim during the different ages. Indeed, if one listens to the ancient elven sagas, the dragons of the Age of Dreams seem to belong exclusively to the Loshaworm lineage, although they were definitively larger, more powerful, and with more varied powers than the Loshaworms of later millennia. Whatever the truth of these dragons during the first days, everything changed when the Vanirs brought harmony upon the wild, primitive shape of Trudvang. Watching the wildfire spread of the other races, it became increasingly obvious to the dragons that they faced the threat of being overwhelmed, despite their might, and driven out of their sanctuaries, perhaps to the point of extinction. If they did not fight for their place in the world, they would never have sought war, only solitude and a right to live, like any other living being on Trudvang. The sad truth of the matter is that this existential threat caused resentment to fester amongst the worms. And the cost of that threat was almost more than the young world could bear. As the seasons turned, the ancient creatures became ever more hateful of the intruders, until they began to crawl out of the dark, dank burrows, emerging long enough to taste the lush, rich air and the heady fertility of the plains and deep forests down below. And they wanted them, venturing further and further afield from their burrows, driven by some invisible, unknowing force to rage against the lands of the elves. It was as though the great beasts were thrown into a wild frenzy by the scent of something growing there, something they had to consume. There are those who would have you believe that scent was the elves themselves. But rebellion does not stir on its own. No matter how strong the feelings of resentment, every fire needs a spark to catch. Something stirred these ancient worms up, driving them to war. Some songs tell of the darkest days, with a horrific ancient dragon, Kurzog, spearheading the slaughter. Other tales recount the horrors of the Niflfang's black rage, and tell of how he sowed the seed of rebellion in his kin. There was the black dragon Nifjal, who tore through the kingdoms of the north, raising the forests in a righteous fury, his anger turning half of the world to ash, and souring the southern coast of Dronvelt so utterly that even now the land is barren. There are others, too, ancient beasts. Like the Mastrovito, the Tulinkins, and the Nyankarmutsri, who, among a thunder of dragons that swept down from beyond the great iron mountains to lead the first savage assault on the wildwoods, and in doing so caused their kin to wake up and feel their rage and repression and torment, they'd cuffed at the hands of the ephemeral foes and struck back. The truth is lost to the mists of time and whispers, another thing claimed by the great enemy, time. Now what passes for truth is what the survivors and their descendants want to believe, or need to cling to. These are the many tales, as there are as many tales as there are Hjalds, and as many variants of those tales as there are stars in the sky. What is true, what is a lie, it does not matter anymore. All that remains are the after effects, the devastation in the wake of the long storm, and the ecological catastrophe that the Great War wrought upon the face of Trudvang. There can be no denying that the dragons struck with collective force against the elves, nor that it is not long before entire kingdoms were ablaze. Trudvang was a world on fire. It was as though thousands of years of pent-up anger were unleashed in that storm of death and devastation, and long before the killing was done, it became something else. Evil. The long storm swept across Trudvang, the dragons destroying hundreds of cities, homes to both elves and their gods, until the great woods and more had been burned by unholy dark fire. The presence of those ancient Loja worms was akin to a curse, not only due to the devastation that their fire brought, but also since the blood of the largest specimens were filled with so much unholy and dark Vintner that the power to taint the lands and sour them for future millennia. It was in that time that the once heavenly Wildheart became corrupted, and the island of Oskla became a forbidden, cursed place. Settlements all across Soj and the lands which in the future would be called Vicentia, Vistergalp, and Bidland, Manjord, Dronvelt, and others further north, scouring the spine of the great iron mountains and the dark woods, burned until the great swaths of the land until across the great swaths of the land nothing remained. It was a loss from which the elves would never recover. The tragedy of the long storm is so deeply rooted within the histories that even today the elves whisper if they ever give voice to those horrors. For over 400 seasons the war raged on, night and day, and every season new dragons were born in those dark burrows, emerging to join the fight. New horrors will with never seen before powers, new horrors with never felt before rage, and although these new hatchlings were far from the raw strength of the primordial dragons, that mattered not, as they were born with new gifts, becoming more and more dangerous with each new generation of hatchling. So bloody and brutal and futile did this war become that for every dragon the elves brought down, there were 6 new ones being born into the conflict. But rather than bend or break, the elves stood tall, unbroken, unbowed, and threw themselves into the fight that would shape the future of the world. They fought for every leaf, every seedling, every blossom, and ultimately every life, because that was what, being threatened by the scorching fires of the dragon breath. Left unchecked, the world they had nourished would be reduced to ash. Never in their long lives had the elves fought with such heroism or determination, and never have so many fallen. But then never has the cause been so desperate. Savin Paha, the abandonment, the great betrayal. There is no vault in the heart of Soj that contains all that is known of all that was, all that is, and all that will be. There is only the memories woven into the sagas and the great songs, and the echoes they hold of what really happened in those dark days. The most potent of the tales, those with the lasting power to afflict the listener and bring out stirrings of empathy and understanding, have one thing in common. They all claim the gods' abandonment. They abandon the elves during the worst possible hours. How these events are painted varies between the tellers. Those recounting the sadness of the Alamaleni, for instance, may offer a more melancholic tale, while the Corpacoli's verse of the great song swell with rage at the betrayal, while the Talviaka verses hew to a more determined quest, neither prepared to mourn nor to rage against what has been lost, but rather determined to find it once more. Music plays a fundamental role in all of the histories and in evincing emotion from the listener. It can stir the heart and fire the blood, echoing the rage of dragons, or slow, taking on the deep, less profound rumble of doom, making that the threat feel far more elemental, or just as easily lift up in joy, swooping and swelling like a tide come to sweep the listener away. To listen to the tales of the Lamaleni, the long storm was nothing short of a genocide, and facing the full force of the ancient dragons and the new breeds, there was every likelihood that an entire generation of elves would be wiped out, and with it any hope of the species surviving what was to come. Sorry. One more time. To listen to the tales of the Alamaleni, the long storm was nothing short of a genocide, facing the full force of the ancient dragons and the new breeds. There was every likelihood that an entire generation of elves would be wiped out, and with it any hope of the species surviving that was to come. It was slaughter. Entire cities burned. The stink of melted flesh filled the air. It was an ever-present, the most common odor of the forest, the perfume of death. They even came to give it a name that encapsulated the hopelessness of the aroma, Matahaju. And like the perfume of death, that name still lingers today when the elves enter the grove that has spoiled and is filled with the stench of rot and decay. Every one of the sagas begins with the gods standing side by side with their children, fighting for the world they nurtured and nourished. And while the abandonment comes in many forms, there can be no denying that the Vanirs left Trudvang and its inhabitants to their own fate. The tale of the Corpicoli are bleaker in their outlook than those of the Ilamaleni or Talviaka, and the tale of the Vanir's cowardice and how, believing the war lost, these so-called gods fled Trudvang rather than go down in the flames of destruction with their creation. Stories speak about the ancestors of the Corpicoli meeting in the city of Turvanica on Soj to solemnly curse the gods themselves. Today, like so many elven cities, Turvanica has long since been purged from the landscape of Trudvang, but the Corpicoli, who migrated northwards, remember it still as the place where their culture was founded, fundamental to what they became. As it was there, in this city, they decided to turn their backs on their past. Elves had long millennia to meditate upon the dramatic events of the Savanpaha and search for the truth, even if most stories tended to lean towards either Corpicoli or Illumaleni ideas. Thousands of other explanations and myths were developed by the elven tribes that became the foundations of countless sagas, ballads, and some which survive today. Some have argued convincingly that the elves wanted nothing less than to take the place of the gods, and that from their position of superiority they began to look down on the gods who had actually created them. It is not an uncommon thing for the student to reach a point where they believe themselves to have outgrown their master. After all, others contended that the elves didn't cherish the greatest gift, life, in a way that pleased the gods and which negligence made them mortal. In fragments of poems that have survived from the Age of Dreams, one can read accounts of a legend of the elf Nojdala, who, in anger, tried to slay one of the Vanirs. But if this deicide was in some way related to the Savanpaha, it is impossible to say. However, even now, or perhaps especially now, many believe that the immortal gods carried a secret within them that was too great to be revealed to the elves after they had been reduced to mere mortals and lost the primeval bliss of their old existence. What the Vanirs knew and why this secret was kept in the dark is the cause for as many wild theories as there are souls to theorize. Many Ilamaleni saw such a secret as a prize to be won, and believe that it can still be won, as the gods sought to test them. And this greatest test of all was to see if they could live in Trudvang without their creators. There is an element of logic as well as wishful thinking about it, of course. If the elves could somehow nurture the world created for them and see it flourish under their care, then why wouldn't the gods see that it was safe to return and walk once more by their sides? The Corpicoli laugh at such naivete. They blame the Vanirs for their cowardice and treacherousness and seek to hold them accountable. Any such secret, surely, is contained within the land itself, carried on the voice of the trees. The Talviaka believe in the secret, though unlike their brethren, they do not believe the test is simply to wait, lingering, aging, and hurting. They see the true test as one of self-help. The gods are there to be found. Every secret there is to be learned. The world will offer up its secrets to those who seek the answers. There are, though, some few gathering within their number that are dissatisfied and believe all of the old gods are not gone, but rather dead beneath the ice. The death cult calls itself Frostnudalatin, after the ripples they see in the ice beneath their feet. They seek definitive proof in the form of a mass grave somewhere beneath the ice plains, which they believe will answer the question of the abandonment once and forever. The dwarves have no doubt as to what caused the abandonment, and in their own sagas are full of the failure of the elves, unworthy of walking shoulder to shoulder with their creators. How could the Vanir abide the constant reminders of their children's weakness and disappointment? How could they be expected to stay in the face of their failure? They were not worthy of the gods, so the gods left in search of a new world to shape, a world where their second creations might make right the mistakes they had made with their first children. Amongst the elf tribes themselves, there could be 1,000 answers to the pain of abandonment, and 1,000 more imagined with little trouble. What is inescapable is the fact that it was an ordeal beyond bearing, and came at a time when they needed their gods the most. It wasn't as though the Vanirs sat their children down and offered a reason for leaving, but then what reason could be for such a betrayal? Today the sagas tell of the night of the burning sky, the only indication the Vanirs had fled, coming in the form of spears of light streaking across the night sky. These spears were the wake of the burning vapor trails left by the Vanirs as they disappeared forever into the darkness of the heavens. The emptiness that fell upon the elves drove them to their knees. How could they hope to stand even now, the dragons mobilized for their final battle? The despair mounted as the beat of wings filled the firmament. They had lost everything to the skies, their gods, their great enemies both sweeping and streaking across the heavens. The rain of fire promised to end all that had been given their lives to seed and nurture. The ground itself would die beneath the onslaught. How could any rise up to fight in the face of this relentless enemy now? Alone, they were nothing. The slough of despond fell heavily over the elves, who collapsed beneath the weight of it. They had lost so many kin, and now their creators were gone. They were alone in this God-forsaken place, left to die. The only mercy was it would not be long until everything was unmade in fire. Locked in paralysis, it was all they could do to watch as the dragons swooped down, their breath scorching the land and turning life to cinder and ash. More of their kin fell, bodies burned beyond recognition, robbed even of the final right of nourishing the land so that the fresh life might arise from their sacrifice. How could they have been so deceived by their creators? They had lived their lives by the principles of kindness and generosity, giving of themselves to nourish this world, to feed it, to see their creators might be proud of what their children had achieved, to see the glory reflected in every leaf and vine. What could they have done to deserve such a betrayal? These questions had no answers, but it did not take long for those left behind to being leveling fingers and accusations at each other. For surely some great ill had forced the gods to leave them to die in this place. The schism the separation of the heart, the division of the lineages. It was during the aftermath of this great betrayal that the elves fell to war within themselves, even as their kingdoms burned, unable or unwilling to grasp the consequences of the Vanir's betrayal. The long storm was nothing short of a purge, and they were facing extinction. Some were prepared to fight to the end, others to the point of bowing their heads and waiting for the fire to burn them. The truth was, doubts and differences had been festering for an age. But with abandonment, everything was hothoused stress and grief and fear, bringing out those differences and grievances, and with them the deep-seated hatred and suspicions that went back through the generations. It was an aspect of the storm no sword could parry, no arrow or bolt could punch through, and no funeral shroud could silence. As with every tree and flower they had nurtured, the seeds were sown by their own hands. There was a bleak irony in that, though the tribes were too close to see it. It is a sweeping generalization to claim that there were only 3 different mindsets that caused the rifts between the elves. There were hundreds, thousands. Grief is a complex thing, and the children of the gods were being forced to cope with it as they were being murdered by a foe greater than any they have ever faced. Worse came, though, when the first of them died for no reason they could discern. No wound, no weapon, no trace of poison. It was as though the body had simply lost the will to live, and they succumbed to death. It was their first taste of the curse of mortality. Their abandonment had left them. The abandonment had left with them. It struck deep to the heart of everything they were and believed. It was the one death they would never recover from. It was the one wound they would never heal. Because there was nothing to heal. There was no cut to be staunched. There was no sickness to be sweated through. It was hardly surprising that faced with this new reality, their relationship with eternity had been fundamentally changed. With each tribe holding beliefs starkly divided from their kin, they were never going to be able to withstand the sense of worthlessness that came from being left behind. A sort of mad obsession took root, with the elves desperate to find an answer to why they had been left behind, that had them accusing each other, looking for traitors in their own kin. During these dark days, when Ilamaleni, Korpakali, and Talviaka turned on each other, they were blind to the devastation the dragons wrought. It was as though some existential level, they no longer cared about the world they had created and paid little mind to it as it burned. Despite the fact that the forest smoldered with dragonfire, despite the fact the ground was ash and would be barren for generations to come, despite the fact that the great cities lay in ruin, despite the fact that the ancient Idras cried out in pain as the trees around them succumbed to the torture of the fires. None of that mattered, because it was no longer the enemy. It was merely pain. In those moments, time became the enemy, taking them further and further from their gods and from their place within eternity. Theirs was a grief that could not be contained. Theirs was a sorrow that eclipsed their burning world. It was during this fateful hour that the elf queen, Aino, the successor of Welitheli, came into her own. Without her, it is safe to assume there would be no elves in Trudvang today, and that it would be a very different world. Aino, who would later to become known by the name Valki, sought wisdom in the ancient traditions, retreating to nature to receive counsel of the Idras. She climbed the highest peaks to commune with the mountains, and ran the deepest forests, listening to every leaf and tree as they echoed the pains of their burning brethren across the world. Better than any, she understood that in the wake of abandonment, every life in Trudvang was connected now in a way it hadn't been before. It was susceptible to time, and that made every life an ally in this endless war. When the storms raged at their worst, the elf queen of the distant western isle, Toika, gathered her advisors and warriors to her to share all that she had learned from the land, and together they wove a grand plan for how Trudvang herself would fight back against the dragons. With the elven kin calling to nature as their ally in the fight against the burning evil. Together, the grass and the trees, the earth and all living things therein would fight against the evil that had taken root. This was no longer a war in which the elves were alone. It had gone beyond that now. Now, with the world on fire, it had reached the point where it was threatening the very existence of Trudvang. Aino summoned the heart of Trudvang to go to war with her, and there were those amongst the tribes who even now believed this was the one true gift of the gods to them, and why they had to leave for it to happen, in that it was no betrayal, but rather the great salvation. They argue that had the gods never left, Trudvang wouldn't have survived the destructive fires of the dragons, and the whole world would have been reduced to ash. It took something extraordinary to save the world. It needed the soul of Trudvang herself to stand against the devastation, the essence of all creation to oppose the violence that the dragons committed. Trudvang because Trudvang, because no weapons, no power, not Vintner or any other gift, not even the magic of the gods, could resist. What began with a barely breathed whisper from Ainu to the oldest Idras took root and spread quickly across the land, and soon that call for aid had reached the ear of every living organism not allied with the dragons, and they understood the need in her cry for help. Wherever the dragons landed, seeking refuge and rest, shelter to recover their strength and replenish the fires in their bellies, they were met with a rebellion, harried and denied rest. There was no respite. They had started this war, but Trudvang herself would end it. Nature conspired with the elves, ensuring they knew all they needed to know, and when they needed to know it. One by one, the dragons were chased down and slaughtered, though it was no easy victory, and those final deaths took a mighty toll on all the species left behind. But with the prize so great, the price was one all were willing to pay, even at the cost of so many brave souls who fell beneath the slash of claws and talon, and the searing flame before the final dragon was dead in the dirt, food for the land it had tried to destroy. Treasures and relics beyond imagining were lost to the dragon's fires, most irreplaceable. So much wisdom burnt up in the settlements and the cities that had been raised, while so many species and genus of flora had been so painstakingly nurtured into bloom to create the endless varieties of Trudvang's ecology, now would never bloom or blossom again, but the long storm was over. The dragons were dead. The elves needed to believe that the seeds could be found with tender love, nurtured until the land was finally restored. For the Ulamaleni, that became the meaning of their lives, and they dedicated themselves to restoring the soul of Trudvang. In the wake of the endless fighting, the survivors took to the night sky again, trying to reach out to their gods. All they saw up there were the glittering shimmering spots of light, the stars. In the eyes of the Alamleni, they saw their gods looking down in their glory, approving, and took comfort from knowing that the last gift had been well used, and now it fell to them to restore the world for their Creator's eventual return. Though the eyes of the Corporcoli saw that their gods fleeing further and further from them, their lights receding, but it didn't matter. They had won this world without them, and its soil and soul were theirs now in a way it had never been before. But for the Talviaka, they saw only the distance between the light of the stars and the soul of Trudvang, and vowed to close it. All right, I think we'll stop there because we're getting into, we'll shortly be into all of the magic items and blades and things. So if you want to, let me know in the comments if you want to hear about any of the relics and items of the elves. It's quite a list. Cloak of the Wildwood, the Hero's Cauldron, the Bow of Jameses, the Bounty of the Crow Ring. Yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff, but I think it's going to be hard. It doesn't have enough of a narrative. It's just going to, be a list of things. But we'll leave it there for tonight. So some pretty dark Christmas reading, but hopefully it was interesting. Look at the art in this book is just so wonderful. There's so many great pieces, and I like how they do the kind of this sepia kind of antiqued tone for even all the pencil work. It kind of unifies the look of the book itself really well. That's the one thing you cannot take away from Riotminds is they have really nice art direction. The layout for their English books is just beautiful, and there's so much good art that they commissioned for this. And hopefully we'll see it again in the books that Free League will be developing. I hope we see a lot of this restored. Yeah, very beautiful stuff. All right, so that will conclude the Seed of the Vanirs, the Elves background story. Yeah, there's a lot of really beautiful writing and very painful and interesting background to the elves. So that was really fun. So I do have, like we talked about before, the 5e conversion. So we're at Christmas, so we can call it here, or we can do some more readings from Trudvang. Let me just pull this out. The other thing that may be fun, this was part of Kaman's board game crowdfunder, The Fabulous Art of Trudvang and Other Stories. So this is basically a lot of the art that Riotminds commissioned, and there's Paul Bonner himself, and it goes through each different piece and kind of what they were thinking. So a little bit more of a kind of a summary of each of the peoples and the lands and how they were designed. So some small text, but mostly visual. So this might be fun to go through. There's some really really beautiful pieces in here, and this is produced on this really nice heavy paper. It's not super high gloss, so it'll show well on the camera. It's kind of more of a satin finish, but really thick. And this book will last forever if the binding holds. But this might be fun to go through. Because there's these double full spreads of these Paul Bonner paintings. These are great. So maybe we'll flip through and read this at the end, because this talks about a lot of the kind of the design philosophy for the setting and things. And it gets it might get a little too spicy for YouTube. There's some nudity and maybe some blood and guts, but we'll see. We'll see if the stream suddenly gets shut down. But this is another option, as well as what I've been threatening before, the 5e conversion. So they did so many. There's all these like little soft cover booklets that are basically like spell lists and everything, so that these tomes didn't get too incredible, because they had to combine everything into 2 books, so that they didn't get too insanely the page count stayed down. They converted a lot of this stuff to softcover books. And here's the 5e sheet, so we'll take a look at that as well. And let's see. Oh yeah. So yeah, there's the hero companion and the setting companion for 5e. So we can take a look at that, and that'll maybe tell us a little bit about what Free League might have to do, how the system and the thinking will change, and how the setting can be conformed to 5e is a more kind of heroic superhero kind of figures, which I don't think matches this kind of dark and gritty setting as well. There, death is so important, and death of characters, and pain and suffering, that just doesn't happen in 5e. So, and then again, on the other hand, Dragonbane is mirth and adventure. Like, Dragonbane has a sense of humor, which I don't think exists so much in Trudvang. Trudvang is a darker, more survivalist, kind of desperate setting. So the travel rules and things are going to have to be, dark and vicious, as well as the wild beasts of the lands. So we'll see how they decide to do that, to get that flavor in there. The good thing about it is that the original people working on the setting for Riotminds are involved in the Dragonbane conversion. So that might be a good thing. And they were also involved in the 5e conversion. So yeah, we can take a look at all of this stuff. Just let me know in the comments if any of this stuff sounded exciting. Maybe an art book would be fun, less reading and more wow to look at. Sorry, I think I'm shaking the camera. But yeah, as you can see, I went all in on Trudvang, so I have an insane amount of books for this setting and this system. So that will be the end of the elves for now, unless I get a lot of comments saying more more elven war and slaughter and artifacts and magic swords and things. But otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll go from there. We'll do something from there, and yeah, there's lots of stuff for the new year. Lots of new game systems and things. We will pick up in a couple of days, so it'll be Friday night, North American time. We'll be back with the Swords of the Serpentine. We just had a little opening scene, and we'll start the actual. We'll finish the opening. The opening adventure, and then pick up the campaign from there. So subscribe to the channel to get notified when that happens. Give me a like on these videos if you're enjoying this, or if this is just too dark and it's ruining your Christmas. You can let me know that too. But I'm enjoying this a lot. I think there's a lot of beautiful writing that I think people didn't get to appreciate so much. The system itself, I don't know how playable it is. But the setting is great, and I'm glad it's still alive. It lives on in the board game, and it will live on in Dragonbane. So thank you for joining me, and thank you so much to the patrons and members for making all of this possible. Happy holidays. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and things will be good in the new year for you. So that's all for tonight, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.